So English 1C is a class that focuses on rhetoric and argument. So in this lecture, I just kind of want to introduce you to rhetoric and argument, and it's the same kind of lecture that you'd get if you were in a ground class. So if we know that English 1C is a class that focuses solely on rhetoric and argument, right, what we have to understand is that rhetoric and argument are linked. That before we can talk about argument, we have to understand what rhetoric is. So in a ground class, what I would do is I'd pose this question to the students, and I'd say, okay, so let's define the term rhetoric. And generally you can break students up into three groups, right? There's the student who is panicked, they've never heard the term rhetoric, and they look like they're about ready to cry. Then there's the student that has heard the term rhetoric, they don't really know what it means, but they've heard the term. And then there's a few brave students who actually admit that they can define rhetoric. So if you're in the position where this is the first time you've ever heard the term rhetoric, or you're not sure what it means, you're in the perfect spot, because I'll kind of walk you through the steps of rhetoric right now in this kind of lecture. So generally, since we know that some students have never heard the term rhetoric, we want to first start out with the people who use rhetoric. And so in a ground class, I can ask, okay, if we can assume that there are people who use rhetoric, who are these people? The number one group associated with rhetoric is politicians. Students always associate politicians with rhetoric. They may not know what the word means, but they always know that somehow politicians are associated with rhetoric. So if you think about it, we got out of a really ugly political campaign last fall, and somewhere along the lines you might have heard Donald Trump is using rhetoric, or you might have heard Joe Biden is using rhetoric. So it's safe to assume that we can argue that politicians use rhetoric. The second group that students always associate with rhetoric is lawyers. Lawyers always are associated with rhetoric. Those are the two top groups of people that are associated with rhetoric. And then as we kind of go down the list, sometimes students will say, well, a writer might use rhetoric, or a journalist might use rhetoric. So these are just the people that use rhetoric. So then we want to talk about forms of rhetoric. So if I were to talk about a form of rhetoric, and we go off the assumption that it's safe to say that politicians use rhetoric, in a ground class I might ask students, okay, let's take former President Barack Obama. If Barack Obama were to pop up on this video right now, and we know he uses rhetoric, what's he doing? And most students will say, well, he's talking. And I say, well, what is he specifically doing? And we might say he's giving a speech. So a speech is a form of rhetoric. And then I might ask students, well, how many people have seen former Barack Obama speak live in person? Interesting enough, every once in a while I used to have people who had seen him live in person. Some people had served in the military might have seen him live in person. But most students haven't seen Barack Obama live in person. I said, well, how is that possible? And they'll say, well, TV. Well, then TV can be a form of rhetoric, right? So we might say if TV is a form of rhetoric, speech is a form of rhetoric, well, that might also mean things like radio is a form of rhetoric, right? Or that movies are a form of rhetoric, or technology could be a form of rhetoric, whether it be a Facebook or a video. So these are all just forms of rhetoric. So once we consider, okay, we know that there are people who use rhetoric, politicians, lawyers, writers. So we might call the person who is a writer, we might call him a journalist, and their form of rhetoric would be a newspaper, right? The forms of rhetoric might be speech, TV, internet, radio, right? So what I want to do then, if we have an idea of, okay, here are the people who use rhetoric, here are forms of rhetoric, I'm going to give you my definition of rhetoric. And my definition of rhetoric is words that are used to manipulate, to deceive, and to con people. So throughout the first couple of weeks of class, I'm going to define rhetoric as words that are used to mislead, deceive, and con people. And so what I want you to do now is I just want you to kind of think about some of the ideas I've talked about. There are two other videos that might give you a sort of a little more background to the context of rhetoric. And then afterwards, there's just kind of a discussion board question where I want you to kind of just reflect on what you've learned from this video and from some on the other two videos on how you would define the term rhetoric, and that'll give us something to play around with as we get class started. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you come up with in your discussion board class. It's going to be a lot of fun because the rhetoric is always a great part of the class. And remember, I'm going to hold on to my definition, and I'm going to define rhetoric as words that are used to manipulate, to deceive, and to con people. So I look forward to what you have to say in your discussion board posts.